All right.
All right. Welcome and good afternoon, everybody. I wanted to introduce myself. My name is Cheryl Rice. I work for Ohio NRCS, the Natural Resources Conservation Service. I am the Conservation Innovation Grants and Regional Conservation Partnership Program Coordinator. So CIG and RCPP, more letters than you need to do with a little bit of alphabet soup under my name there. But I wanted to welcome you all and thank you so much for your interest in CIG. And some people call it SIG, some people call it CIG. So however you hear it, you're right. You got it right. Can I just get some confirmation everybody can see the screen, the slides I have up?
Yes, we can see it.
Beautiful. Thanks so much. Great. Okay. So let's take a moment here. All righty. So for those of you who are new to CIG, I just wanted to make sure everybody's on the same page on what the purpose and the goal of CIG is. It's a great program. It's been around since 2006. That farm bill that was available back then started this idea, really looking at making sure there was available some way to get new and innovative conservation-based work done outside of our traditional farm bills programs that we are helping producers with. This is a way to really get in new ideas and look at what we can do for accelerating adoption of conservation in Ohio. So the purpose of CIG is to develop and adopt these new innovative practices. The state level CIG that we're talking about today really just needs to be within the state boundaries. It really isn't any one part of an agricultural industry or another. It can be across agriculture or forestry, broadly speaking. So think about it pretty broad, fiber, food, how we're feeding people. It could be a development of a new technology or a tool. So think a software app or some sort of new technology that could be in a cab of a tractor or a tool that would be out in the field when somebody's scouting in their fields. Any of those type of things would be something CIG would be excited about. Testing a new or modified approach that is already existing in NRCS's conservation practice standards. So if you have a new and exciting way of doing cover crops or a new and exciting and innovative way of dealing with manure composting, those are things we're interested in that we want CIG to help us get more information and move forward with. Something else to think about, CIG also is interested in pushing forward more widespread adoption of innovative and effective technologies and approaches. So think about that in a sense of geography, and we'll talk about that a little bit more as we go here. But sometimes we have great adoption in, say, the northern part of North Dakota, but we're not doing that same work here in Ohio. So maybe it's not so much that it's a new technology, but it's new to Ohio, or it's new to a portion of Ohio. So just something to think about there. CIG is really looking for something that was sufficiently studied to indicate that there would be a high probability of success. So a brand new idea, meaning never been tested before, isn't always a great fit for CIG. We really want something that's got a little bit of background behind it, a little bit of understanding, but we're really looking to bridge between that initial sort of demonstration, piloty kind of thing to something that we can move towards a larger field scale or a widespread adoption opportunity out there. CIG likes to demonstrate and evaluate, verify effectiveness. So something that we think is a pretty good idea and we think it's doing what we think it's doing, CIG likes to evaluate those things so our NRCS can get enough information to make it available to add to our current standards and specs, or again, tweak or modify existing ones. But we're really looking at something that we can use out in the field for a widespread adoption through a number of producers that are working in that same area of agriculture that the CIG is focused on. We like to do something that's adaptive management, and we also like the ability, again, to transfer. How do we take this idea you have in your CIG and pass that along to other producers and farmers and ranchers and other places to help them with their operation and change and improve things there? We like to take proven technology and approaches, again, to new geographic areas or a new sector. So if there's something we know really works well in dairy, but we haven't used that same technology in horticulture, we haven't used it in livestock for like beef production, but it was working really great in dairy, but we think we can use it maybe in something else. Those transfers between different approaches and agricultural sectors, as well as geography, is something CIG is interested in doing. So again, sometimes something that's new, maybe up in the Northwest Ohio area, but we're not doing it down in the Cincinnati area. CIG might be a good place to get that transfer from north to south. So I often get this question, define innovation, what you mean. And hopefully those first couple slides give you some sense, but I want you to think about it a little bit differently than just maybe what you learned out of the definition out of Webster's. So it does mean new, novel, something we haven't tried yet, but again, maybe not widely adopted yet. Maybe your CIG is going to address a barrier to that adoption. And generally CIG is really good at addressing technology-based barriers or resource-based barriers. CIG is not great for necessarily always outreach-based ones. There's other outreach-based sort of dollars available through states usually when we have a group of individuals that we're struggling with. Sometimes other ones can use that well, but if your technology is really moving to a historically underserved community and that's the barrier, is that community of folks doesn't know it, then CIG is a good fit for that. So take a look at that as well. If you're trying to talk to a sector in the ag industry that hasn't heard it before, and there's a barrier, there's a reason for that. If your CIG is going to address that barrier effectively, we're interested in that as well. Ag industry oftentimes has needs that are not being addressed out in the general business. And sometimes because we are the government and we can kind of share that with everybody, and there's a little bit less competition involved, we're interested in being that venue. We're interested in being that I'll call it a vector when we want to move something from one to place. Sometimes somebody who's not looking to profit on it individually is more interested in sharing it broadly. And that's something that we might need. We might just need a little more information, some more data, and a little bit more information on proof of concept so it can move from that sort of genesis of an idea to something that can be implemented at the field level. So hopefully that gives you a sense with the idea that you come to the table with today, how that might fit with CIG. So I wanted to direct you to make sure you take a look on grants.gov now. The Ohio CIG is posted. I know I emailed it to a lot of folks that have been contacting me over the last couple of years about their interest in CIG. Those folks, I try and keep a kind of a running list. But if I missed you for some reason, my apologies, wasn't intentional. Please go to grants.gov. You can search Ohio and CIG, and it'll be the first thing that pops up on the list for you. Please look through that extensively. There's all kinds of good stuff in there. So some of the page references up here in the upper right-hand corner, that's what that's referring to. One of the most critical ones is really making sure this year's state CIG meets the same targets that you have. So every CIG, both the national one that goes out from national headquarters plus the ones from the state here, have natural resource targets, meaning the most critical areas we think the most need is out there. The states are allowed to tweak and pick those to really focus on what the state needs are. If there's something unique going on in Ohio that maybe isn't happening in Iowa or Florida or Texas, we're allowed to take these state CIG dollars and really target it. So Ohio has chosen the 4 that are up on the screen this year. They don't change huge amount year to year, but we do rotate them around to make sure we're hitting new things that are arising or new opportunities that really have presented themselves over the last 12, 18, 24 months. So the one at the top I wanted to draw your attention to is urban agriculture. This is a priority for the agency and this administration. Very excited to be able to support what's going on in urban agriculture. So think about things that are needs there. Pollinators are a huge issue with urban agriculture and proximity and how they can address the crops that are growing on those urban ag sites. So we're interested in what we can do to support that. Water use and energy efficiency, both of those things are very critical in the urban ag environment, typically very intensive growing in small geographies. So water use becomes really critical and energy, of course, as well. And then composting. This is that regenerative piece that's important in pretty much all agriculture, but urban agriculture, oftentimes this is a limiting resource that they have for organic matter and some of that regenerative piece. Water quality and soil health we've had as a resource target in Ohio for quite a few years. There's lots of reasons for that. Water quality is probably the most obvious one. I wanted to highlight the three things to talk about. We're not just necessarily interested in phosphorus or DRP. Those are although that is very important here in Ohio for Western Lake Erie for certain. We're also interested in sediment and also nitrogen losses. So all of those things fall under this water quality category inside these research targets. Adaptive management is something that we're very curious about. Any innovations that you can bring your project to that. We're really, even in the Ohio River Basin and some of our inland lake systems, all these three are quite critical and a lot of need there. We're looking for, great ideas here to really move the needle. And again, soil health falls pretty much in the same with what you would anticipate as in soil health. Our agency has been pushing soil health now for more than 15 years in a very concerted way. So think compaction, organic matter. We're really looking broadly at soil biology. So some of the key things are going to be increase and improvement in sampling intensity, what we're getting out of those soil sample quality wise, and then what we can do for frequency and effective BMP installation that are going to improve soil health here in Ohio. Another one, forestry is a very big and important realm inside for agriculture in Ohio, and we're looking at some of the more innovative edges here. The silvopasture, there's been a number of interested agricultural operations at looking at sort of the edge of the Wayne and in Southeast Ohio about how to make some of those forest-based operations more sustainable as they relate to that larger natural resource, something to think about there. And as always, invasive plant species control and suppression is critical in forestry-based work. So those are all things we're really interested in. Just something to keep in mind on when we offer CIG the next time, these may slightly change. Every time we offer this, we take a look at all of the bullet points underneath these major topic areas, and we tweak them to things that we know are critical and we need here in Ohio, and maybe more broadly regionally, but certainly here in Ohio. Eligibility. So who's able to apply for CIG? It's a very long list. Basically, you just need to be a U.S.-based non-federal entity or an individual. So an individual landowner or producer can apply for CIG. That's fine. Basically, the only one not allowed to are other federal agencies. This CIG was not intended to be an interagency exchange of dollars. There's other avenues for that. So the longer list then is here. And this is also inside the announcement. So take a look if you're curious what we mean by US-based non-federal agency. This is what we mean, or entity. So cities, towns, counties, state government, small businesses, special districts. So that can be soil and water district, watershed districts, conservancy districts. All those have applied in the past. Many colleges, universities, community colleges have all applied in the past. This can also be agricultural-based groups. We've had the grazing organizations and other commodity-based groups apply for CIG in the past when there's some things they want to move forward within the group that they work for. So it's a very long list. So this is your opportunity here. The CIG is kind of wide open. Often, if not common in CIG, there are dollars that will go directly to landowners or farmers to do whatever this new conservation technology is on their operation. Oftentimes, the partnership that is applying for CIG would like to provide financial support for that farmer for doing that piece of the project. We do have some limitations on that. The producers that are receiving these CIG dollars need to be what we call EQIP eligible. And EQIP is our environmental quality incentives program. So it's one of our base farm bill programs. It's one of our largest ones here in Ohio. And there's a basic eligibility there that is pretty simple and straightforward. You basically have to be an agricultural operator, and you have to have somebody who has a vested interest in an agricultural operation and have control of that land that they're doing agriculture on. And so this is just something to think about. If you do have interested landowners, people that locations to do something, whether that's applying this technology or this new approach, make sure that they go into the Farm Services Agency and get themselves evaluated for their conservation program eligibility. and adjusted gross income. Those are ways that those dollars can actually go down to producers. You are not required to have an EQIP eligible producer inside your project, but I can tell you it is a positive thing when our landowners get to be hands-on, involved with new technology. It moves conservation forward. Definitely a favored condition inside a project. So some of the basics with CIG, and again, this is all in the announcement, but CIG loves to fund pilot projects, field demonstrations, and on-farm conservation research, sort of what we discussed on the first few slides here. CIG funds projects that are about 1 to 3 years. The funding goes about 3 years. We are allowed by statute to add an additional 12 months if you are running late. This happens the last 2 years in the middle of a global pandemic. A couple of our projects had to extend a little bit. Circumstances certainly changed, as well as some of their approach based on materials and supply chain issues that came up. So that's the flexibility that you have. My suggestion is if you have something, a very large project that maybe is a 6 or 7 year project, take a look at it, see if you can cut it into smaller pieces and maybe do 2 years and do phase 1 of your project. And CIG could help you with that instead of trying to take the whole bite and try and make it fit into 3 years. It's much better to do a more doable bite-sized piece in a 3-year time frame instead. The budget ceiling is $150,000, and the floor for this budget is $50,000. So that's the federal portion. So because it does have a 1-to-1 match, meaning for every federal dollar, we'd want partners to come up with a cash or in-kind match of the same dollar. So those projects then, the smallest ones are about $100,000, and the largest ones are about $300,000. So just something to think about as far as project size. That's what we're looking for. There are a couple things with funding restrictions. There's probably a much longer list. This is all on page 24, again, of that announcement. A couple ones that come up very frequently as we administer these grants are one thing that is not allowed. I cannot pay for capital expenditures on a building or like a greenhouse or something like that. I can't put a new roof on your building. I'm not going to put flooring inside an agricultural facility. Really, what we're looking to do here is if you have to rent a building to do that, we usually can do something like that, but I can't install windows. I can't install new doors. I can't put a new heating system in there for a facility. Often in the course of getting landowner engagement or outreach and education, people want to do things what we call entertainment costs or meals. Generally, we cannot spend federal dollars on those things. There are some caveats with those meals. If you were going to do a day-long conference, there are some exceptions in there, but generally speaking, that's just better to put in the match portion. You're more than welcome to put that in the match, and then on the federal half, we can pay for the facility to rent it for your conference or what have you, to make sure you can do share this technology with the community of folks it serves. And then basically overarching any costs that lie outside of the scope of the project. Oftentimes people bring in things that they think is within scope, but once we take a close look at what the scope of the project is, it falls slightly outside of it. So just something to think about as you're generating that budget, the things that we're allowed to do. Take a close look at page 24. And again, that's a great thing to send questions to me as you're developing it, or give me a call and say, hey, we're thinking about this. Is that a federal expense, or is that something I'm going to have to find outside of the federal reimbursement? Something I also wanted to point out, and we'll talk a little bit more here in a couple seconds about what I call HU here, and that's the historically underserved applicants. That 1-to-1 match is reduced if you are serving or if you are a historically underserved entity, and that match can be reduced to as much as the matching component would only need to be 25% of the overall project expenses. So we'll talk about that a little bit here in the moment as well. So what do I mean by historically underserved? So I wanted to make sure that the historically underserved targets is a very significant priority for this administration and for CIG. We do take in the review process that they are given preference, as well as in the overall funding, there's at least 10% set aside for historically underserved projects, meaning they do have a competitive advantage when that is the target. So what do I mean when I say historically underserved? That was defined in the Farm Bill, and that link there is live. You can type that in and find it. But basically what I pulled off is where that link is at, and it meets under these 4 categories. Limited resource farmer or rancher, and that is someone of reduced means. There is a tool, that link there is a tool to evaluate whether or not you are or are not a limited resource farmer. A beginning farmer and rancher, basically that's somebody who has never farmed or someone who has farmed for less than 10 years. And then socially disadvantaged, there's a list there of socially disadvantaged groups historically that have been not well served by the USDA, as well as veteran farmers and ranchers. And again, that is someone who can show us their discharge papers that can do that. And that's a self-verification, just so you're aware. But that's what we mean. So what does it mean to be historically underserved and applying for this program? Well, you could be the individual, again, that is a historically underserved producer yourself. It could also be a community-based organization that is comprised of or is working exclusively to serve historically underserved folks. Those communities come from lots of different places, not only geography, but also other based communities like education-based communities, like historically serving, minority serving, as well as Hispanic serving and tribal serving colleges and universities. Also community-based organizations that are based on, this can be faith-based organizations or, other producer-based organizations that have more than 50% of their membership being historically underserved. So again, if this is something that you're looking at making sure you get this preference, it needs to be stated in your proposal, and also a little bit of the supporting information that we know when you say historically underserved, that we know that you mean who you mean you're talking about. But again, if you have questions about this in the process, please feel free to reach out. I'm happy to clarify with that. We've had great success in Ohio serving some of these historically underserved communities where we do find the technical needs and the geography and the innovation needs typically are greater than the general population. So CIG tends to serve that very, very well. Happy to do it. So what's a little bit of the responsibility when you are a CIG recipient? Well, what you get to do, one, you get the sheer joy of working with me for 1 to 3 years. And then also you're able to do some reporting for us. So after your project starts, we go ahead and complete that grant and sign off on all that paperwork. We then, about every 6 months and then every 12 months, we'll do progress reporting and financial reporting. And then also at the end, you'll do a final summary report across all of your project and then whatever end product. So if your goal at the end of the project was to have an app that you could share with a number of folks, we'd want to see that app completed. Or if it was a publication that was going to help, someone in grazing that was going to help that organization and new and beginning grazing operations, we'd want to see that at the end of your project as well. So you're aware the record keeping is important to you to keep track of your expenses. Basically, I get to pay the bills and they need to be real expenses. So think receipts, invoices, tracking spreadsheets. So you're keeping track of the contribution, whatever you brought to the table, and then also whatever you're expecting the federal government to pay for. We're going to need some of that support documentation so we can pay you back for that. And it is all reimbursement. So you'll be spending the money, giving me the receipts, we process that payment, and the money comes back to you. And it is all administered through a web-based digital online interface called EasyFed Grants. Once you get in there, it's fine. Sometimes we have a little bit of a stumbling block as we enter EasyFeds. I haven't had any problems with my CIG folks in quite some time. Once you're in there, you can do all the reporting through there, both the financial and the progress reporting, and then you can also do the requests for reimbursement through there. So it's sort of like going on to your online banking. You sign on a couple different ways. They make sure it's you. You upload your documents, you send me a report that says, hey, this is what we got done. Hey, this is what I need to get reimbursed for. And then on the other side, I'll get an email that says, hey, you got a report to go read. Hey, somebody wants to get reimbursed for something. And it's a pretty neat interface. Like I said, the bulk of our interface with that has gone really smoothly. So I'm pretty happy with it on any given day. So once you've done an application, what happens after this date and it shows up on my end? Well, the first thing that's going to happen is I take a look at it and we look at it here on the program, staff in general, and we do an initial screening. And we take a look to make sure that application is complete based on the notice for funding announcement that just went out, making sure that it's in compliance with all the rules and all the things that were in there. So again, that one-to-one match or that claim for historically underserved for a 25% only match would have to be met in there. So if you don't have one-to-one, you've not met that initial compliance, and we'll let you know that. So that's definitely something you want to check on before you submit it, and just make sure there is a checklist at the end of the announcement. So as long as you're going through that whole checklist and as everything is in there, that's the same checklist I'm going to be using to make sure everything's in there and complete. The next thing I do is I put together a peer review panel. Every CIG does get reviewed by more than one person. It's not just one subject matter expert. I usually have somewhere between 2 and 4 people reviewing all of them, as well as myself. And that's just to make sure if this whole project is about energy efficiency, and I will admit freely, I am not an energy efficiency expert, nor do I claim to be. So I want somebody who is to take a look at your proposal and see its technical merit and see its value, how it would be used inside that agricultural sector. So that's what we do. I usually take somewhere between 4 and 6 weeks to go through that process. They provide comments back. We usually get together as a one whole committee, and we take all of the proposals that came through and sort of stack them up from top to bottom, from the best ones to the ones that didn't fare as well. And then we make a series of recommendations to our state conservationists that will refer back to that ranked list, as well as all the merit and maybe shortcomings or needed improvements. I will tell you this, we don't only take perfect applications. A lot of times something rises to this top because it's 95% great and 5% needs to be tweaked a little bit, or 80% great and 20% needs to be tweaked a little bit. This just happens. Sometimes people have a great idea. There's just one portion that the federal government may not be as excited about or needs to change because it doesn't meet all the program policy very, very easily or very comfortably. So oftentimes we'll come back and we'll make preliminary selections and we'll say, you know, are you willing to make these small changes to be able to move forward with funding? And oftentimes we'll go back to partners and offer that little bit of a tweak if there was just a small sort of piece of your project that wasn't going to work in its current offering. The state conservationist ultimately has the decision. The budget made available is also their decision. That will all, after they've read our feedback, read the recommendations, and usually got in touch back with us. They usually ask a few questions. We go ahead and make selections and make announcements. So what are we evaluated on? This again is on page 26 and 27. I think it even runs over to maybe page 28. But read through this section really well. It's pretty straightforward. The purpose and approach and goals, you need to be very clear about why you're doing what you're doing, how you plan to do these things, and what the end goal out of doing those things is going to create for you. The 25 points being innovative, technology, and approach. So that's a pretty big weight when you start looking at across this this whole project that you're offering. Innovation is a very important thing. One thing I will state very clearly is if there is a practice out there that we can already pay for in our currently existing Farm Bill programs through the EQIP or our Conservation Stewardship Program or another available program, I cannot pay for it in CIG. If NRCS already has an existing standard and spec and you're going to do the same thing that you could do if you were an applicant to EQIP, I cannot pay for it in CIG. This often comes up as wanting to do that plus something else. Well, that's fine, but I can't pay for that practice again. And I can't ensure that they will compete well enough in EQIP to get funded under EQIP to make your project whole. So you need really to find a different way to pay for that if that's your intention. And again, if you're going to take a current and existing standard and do something new with it, a new twist and a new and innovative approach, that's something different altogether. We can take a look at that. Project management, I also want to direct your attention there. Part of what we're looking in project management is that you have the capacity and experience, the skill to be a project manager for this 2 to 3 year project. And a lot of that is just demonstrating that you've done something like this before or something tantamount. Oftentimes people say, well, I've never managed a grant before, but I have done, and they can describe how they've done a project in the past that has had a life more than just, 10 or 12 months. It's been more of a long-term partnership that maybe took 2 to 3 years. That's something that we'd be looking at. And just definitely focus on the transferability as well. Again, what are we paying for? What are you hoping is going to come out the other end of it? And how transferable is it to other folks in the industry? How many other landowners do you think we can reach? Also part of the application process, make sure you look at pages 12 and 13. You're going to need to have a DUNS number, or now they're calling it, instead of just a Dun and Bradstreet number, it's a unique ID. But basically, that process is in there on page 12. There's a link to the website that you go to generate that number if you don't already have one. Also registering with SAM. Again, that's a link in there. And again, the offering does have to be submitted. Your application does have to be submitted through grants.gov. That you kind of create an account with that, just like you would to any other website interface. And what it's going to provide for you is the access to Workspace, where you can work on this offering and all the different pieces, parts, so all of these different pieces you need to draft here for the merit criteria will all be available for you to fill in that application on Workspace. And that can be accessed by multiple people on your project. So it doesn't necessarily have to be just one person that can get access there to Workspace. It can be a collaborative workspace for multiple people on your project. Some appendices I want to draw your attention to on the application package. That first one, the first appendices is probably the most important one, is the application package checklist. Again, it's going to show you all the things to make sure to remind you to include them all as you submit them through grants.gov. A really important one, especially for folks who are new to doing grants, that budget narrative guidance is really, really helpful. It basically tells you what the budget narrative should look like, what you should be referencing, and how much description we need. They even give you a sample budget one there that you can take a look at. There's also what we call a pledge agreement, or basically a contribution letter. So as you go out and you're looking for match, meaning other dollars to leverage the federal dollars to pay for things in your project, these are usually coming from a partner. And normally, because it's not you, the applicant, offering these monies, it's someone else, we need to have a letter from that organization that says, hey, I think this project is great. We're happy to participate over the next 2 to 3 years. We're offering up X amount of dollars, and this is what we're going to do towards the project to contribute these amount of dollars. And so it gives you sort of that template letter. It's a really great thing when you're going out and trying to pull partners in, that you give them sort of this template letter to fill in, that they don't have to draft it starting out at zero when they maybe haven't done this before. They don't know what to put in that letter. This gives you a sample one to send to them and say, hey, this is pretty much what they're looking for. And then it also has the financial forms that you'll be using to submit. And it gives lots of instructions in there. So those forms are a little bit clunky. It's not like your regular old checkbook that you use at the bank, but they are necessary for us to break down that budget so we put everything in the right category. So some online resources. I wanted to provide these today to you as well. So CIG has a database available online of past projects, things we've funded in the past in CIG. Again, it's been around since 2006. The national program has all of theirs in there. This gives a really good sense for what CIG tends to like to fund. It is currently being updated. So you might look at it one day and then a week later, you'll see other stuff. That was under this most recent farm bill. We have been given some additional directions to include more data and more extensive data and more of the state level projects in this database. So that is currently happening. So not only will you find things that the national headquarters has been funding over the last handful of years, but also you'll find some of the state specific projects as well. And again, that's coming over time. It's quite a bit of data, as you might imagine. And that last submission we gave to national headquarters was just a couple months ago. So they should be that contractor should be getting that done, but it'll take a little time. The other thing you might want to look at is there's a great online resource that is for applicants for CIG, basically goes through lots of the needed documents that you have. Again, gives a lot of the stuff that's already in this package, a sample narrative budget, and some advice on how to fill out the forms. And then another thing I always like to peek at is, what does it look like when I get picked, right? When I get selected, what do I need? And there's a grantee resource page as well. So once you've been selected, there's quite a bit on there that'll show you things that a typical grantee would need to be able to manage their CIG project as it moves forward. So definitely take a look at those, because those are great websites. I was actually, I've directed people to this for quite some time. It's always been well populated. So what I wanted to share too is just to make sure you're aware, the deadline for the CIG for this year is March 28th at 11:59 p.m. Eastern time. And so my apologies I wish they would have done it for Friday. I tried to get them to do it for a Friday, so it was done right at the end of the day on a Friday, but they tortured us with making the cutoff date on a Monday. That's all right. We'll have to make a Monday be a real Monday, I guess. The selections we're expecting to make once we get this cutoff here in March, we'll go through that technical review that I shared earlier. That'll happen, and I'm expecting our state conservationists to make decisions by mid-May. And then I'll work through that paperwork process and the grant development process with the selected awardees. And those folks should have a project ready to start putting on the ground sometime in August. That's the expectation. I wanted to make sure everybody got to see our non-discrimination. So we want to see just about everybody apply that's available. And time for question and answers. Brooke, have you seen anything in the chat?
Yes, so we have a question from Heather Haynes. Can the project management be conveyed as a task contracted to a third party?
That's a good question. So let me think through that. So it can be, my question would be back to that. Project management oftentimes, if it is contracted to a third party, would not be paid by federal dollars. It would generally be something that would be match. So I guess my question would be, the answer is yes, it can be there as a task under a third party, that's fine. Generally speaking, if someone's doing the management for the whole project for the CIG, though, we wouldn't be necessarily expecting to pay for it under the CIG, though, I guess is the way I would answer that.
Okay, and then we also have a question from, I'm sorry if I butcher this, Vinayak Shedakar. Are these links, and I believe he's referring to the resource links that you had shown on the PowerPoint, are these links located in the RFA?
They are. And so they should all be in there. If there's anything that you're not finding, again, just reach out to me. I think I grabbed most of them from the notice. There's a couple other things I had separately, like the historically underserved link is definitely in there. I don't think I added anything real exterior to it. I tried to just highlight the resources that are inside the NFO. So you should be able to find everything in there.
Okay. And any other questions at this time? Please make sure to drop them in the chat.
My email and my phone number is up there. So if you do want to reach out.
We've got another question from Matthew Brown. Could you reiterate on the eligibility as related to an EQIP compatible landowner or producer?
Sure, that's a really good point. We'll scoop up there. So oftentimes, again, folks that are going to participate in your project, meaning they're not necessarily the person coordinating the project, but they're interested in demonstrating or being the location where you're demonstrating your new and innovative technology or approach. Oftentimes a project will want to pay that producer for their time and energy. That producer would need to meet the same EQIP eligibility as if they were applying for EQIP for a practice that was, like cover crops or putting in a manure management. And all of those things are listed under that link there. And that is, again, that's available in the notice. So you'll be able to click on that and it pulls it up. But basically, there need to be an agricultural producer or somebody who's got an active interest, somebody who owns agricultural ground or leases it, has control of that land. That land and their production system has to be in compliance with the what we call HEL or highly erodible land or the wetland conservation provisions, which means they have to not be destroying a wetland to farm or have a highly erodible land that they are not following an HEL program plan for. They just need to be a legal entity that's engaged in that agricultural production. And that's basically meet AGI as well, that they can't make over, I think it's $900,000 now a year too in income. So, and again, somebody who's a millionaire doesn't need a USDA money. At least that's the concept. I hope that covers it, Matt.
And then another question from Vinayak. Can you talk a little bit more about being able to use unrecovered indirect costs as a match?
Yes. So all you have to do is put that in your narrative budget, your federal narrative budget. It's usually broken down, and a lot of universities use this because usually that indirect cost is pretty significant. They will create it as its own budget line item saying, hey, you know, this is the income of all the people working on the project, and that unrecovered indirect, this is all that would be constituting of that feedback. They just have a separate spreadsheet, and it, like you said, it's typically match. Because statute really has some significant limitations on that. But it's really broken out in that budget narrative how they want you to show that. And basically, you're just looking at making sure you're referring to folks that are actively involved with the project and that it's within the time frame of your project, which means it starts after we sign the project and that indirect cost stops before right at the end of the project as well.
All right, and we have another question from Heather Haynes. Do you have an estimate of how long it takes to get a DUNS or and the SAM.gov number for individuals, landowners who don't currently have this registration?
That's a good question. And again, that link is in the NFO, so definitely start there. Generally speaking, the DUNS numbers take less than 2 weeks, and SAMs, sometimes it's just about the same. About 2.5 weeks is the longest that I've had someone take. And I've had a couple go a little longer where there was some glitch in the system, but most of them have been 2.5 weeks at the most.
Okay, any other questions?
These are all good questions. All good ones. Definitely take a look at the budget narrative stuff if you're having any questions on how to build up. And I definitely want to encourage folks to take a look at the match portion and really look at what you can bring into the project. Usually most folks come in and are the most concerned that they won't be able to generate enough match. And when we sit down and talk about all the folks that are really interested or very much involved with what they want to do, they usually come out with more than what they need. So definitely take a look at the circle around you of the folks that are very excited or interested or could use the information or the technology you're working towards, and see if they're interested in being a part of moving that project forward. Oftentimes a piece that gets lost is volunteer time. If you're using students to do some piece of the work and they're not, of course, they're not getting paid, that definitely generates some volunteer hours. If they're out there for, 5 hours a week for, a month, come up with a rate that would be a typical rate if you had to pay someone to come out there and do that work. And you can document the hours that way. That's something that gets missed a lot is that opportunity to capture the value of volunteer time. But definitely look at that circle of folks interested in what you're doing and seeing what they're able to link into what you're trying to do.
And we actually have one more question. Is there any connection between the state and national CIGs in terms of priorities, being able to leverage the work on larger scales?
That's a great question. The biggest connection, excuse me, the biggest connection is that both the national and the state programs have the same objectives, have the same purpose and goals. Oftentimes, a number of folks will take what would be a larger scale project, something over $300,000, because again, we're limited to here in Ohio at 150,000 dollars for federal match, meaning one-to-one match means the $300,000 project. If your project is significantly larger than $300,000, you might want to think about applying to the national one because the dollar figure can be much larger. The actual natural resource targets often overlap because, again, water quality and soil health have been national priorities for quite some time. So that's another cross connection. We've had a number of years where a national CIG will have applied through the national program, and then they cut off just the Ohio piece. So that national CIG might be Iowa and Michigan and Wisconsin and Ohio, and that they cut off just the Ohio piece and just applied for the Ohio piece with our state CIG, and we're able to fund a piece of it. And that is if, maybe they didn't compete as well at the national level, so they didn't get the national CIG, but they were able to pay for the state piece of it here in Ohio through the state CIG. So as far as leveraging one from the other, we can't, if you get paid at the national level to do the project, generally, of course, you're not going to get selected for the state level because it's already being funded at the national level, and vice versa. If you apply at the national level and we pay for the state piece here in Ohio, they will cut that Ohio piece out and they will look at your application outside of that. So there's not really a leverage between the two. But there is some connection in the sense that we do talk with one another. So they, if there's a national CIG that's submitted that was also submitted for the state CIG, I usually let them know. So once they get closer to who they're doing for selections and who we are getting closer for selections, we coordinate that. So there's not a miscommunication there about where funding's coming from.
All right, any other questions? I do want to remind everybody that this is a recorded webinar and we will make this available and Cheryl will send out a link and I'll be sure to broadcast this on our social media.
Look forward to hearing from all of you. And again, my email's up there on the screen, so is my phone number. Please feel free to reach out. Especially you've got between now and March 28th. So this is normally when I hear from folks the most. Happy to do it and enjoy your time. Thanks so much for all the questions. Thanks for your attention and have a good day.